Hi, Jordan. How are you?
I'm good, Pradna. How are you?
I'm good too. I'm really excited for this episode and I'm so glad that you could make it.
Thanks for inviting me.
No worries at all. So, the episode is about what it means to be free and happy. And I think you're one of the best people in my life that I can ask this question to. So, what does it mean to you to
I
be
do
free and
spend
happy?
a lot of time talking about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Consciousness. Um, your there's just consciousness, right? There's not your consciousness and my consciousness and his consciousness. It's all just our just consciousness, right? You get that idea?
Yeah.
Science really doesn't have a good explanation for consciousness yet. But the reason I know that it's just consciousness and not individual consciousnesses is because it's not because of a belief or a faith in something. You can get there quite practically and logically, right? Like I could ask you, you want to be happy?
Yeah.
Do you, Pradna? Do you want to be happy? Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel lonely sometimes?
Yeah.
Do you want to suffer?
No.
See, I can answer all those questions exactly the same way. And anybody that's listening to this podcast is going to answer those questions exactly the same way. Anybody, anywhere on the planet, at any point in time, and any social standing, any gender, they're all going to answer those questions exactly the same way. Right. So that's the human consciousness. The human consciousness wants to be free and happy, doesn't want to suffer even a little bit if it can avoid it. And because of the feeling of separateness, we all feel lonely, right?
Yeah.
So, because we're actually just one whole thing in a bunch of different forms. And so that creates that feeling of longing to be connected again, right? So consciousness's essential nature is free and blissful, free and happy, whatever word you want to use, and joyful, right? And it is the awareness that's the cause, sustainer, and destroyer of everything in existence, right? Behind everything that you like, nothing exists without awareness to look at it, right?
Yeah.
So it's always in the background watching, free and happy, everything that's going on as it pretends to be Jordan or it pretends to be Pradna. And it plays like an actor on stage. It puts on the costume and it plays the role and it does all the things. And it feels the highs and the lows, but it's totally unaffected by that. It's always just free and happy, right? It's only the ego, the little small self that gets to experience all the highs and the lows.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to live in alignment with what the universe or consciousness wants to do as you, then you can think of it like free and happy is north on your compass and suffering is south on your compass. So if you are in alignment with consciousness, right? You don't have, your ego is not in conflict with what consciousness wants to do as you, then you'll feel free and you'll be happy with what you're doing. And you'll feel like you have the current of the river pushing you along,
Yeah.
rather than swimming against the current, right? Which is, if you're suffering, you're swimming against the current. The consciousness is trying to do one thing as you, and your ego is like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do something else. And you feel that friction, and that's the suffering, right? So if you're feeling that, then you're off course, right? It's really that simple.
Yeah.
But it's so hard for most people to just kind of accept that they have purpose to their existence. There's something that, I mean, if you had told me when I was your age that I was going to be a yoga teacher and own a yoga studio when I was my age, I would have probably beat you up. I didn't know what yoga was, right? Like I was definitely not headed toward this on my own. I didn't make these choices. I just eventually got to a point where I was like, fine, show me which way to go. And so I just started following that. And as I did that, things got better and better and better. And then I wound up where I was, and I'm free and
Yeah. But
happy.
how do you get ego out of the picture? Like when ego includes your fears, right? Like it includes anxiety, it includes your fears, it includes your thoughts. So how do you get that
Mhm.
out of the way? Like not in resistance with consciousness.
So you have to spend a lot of time functioning as consciousness and not as an ego, right? Which is really a weird thing for a lot of people. What do you mean I can't function as an ego? I'm always me. I've always been me.
Hmm.
But that whole me thing that you're clinging to, it's just an illusion. So it's just a role. You can let that go and change it anytime. Like you said, in the last year, what I would have told you what I wanted last year was completely different from what I want this year. You just totally changed up your game, right? You can do that at any time, right? One would argue that even when you feel like you're in conflict with consciousness or the universe or God or whatever word you want to use, then everything's happening exactly the way it's supposed to, even that conflict, because you have to go through that conflict to learn that lesson, right? So nothing's ever happening by mistake or by accident. It's always actually happening exactly the way it's supposed to, even when you don't like it. Mm-hmm.
So why do we say that? Like we talk about how pain is inevitable, but suffering is inevitable.
Is optional. Yeah,
Yeah,
suffering is optional.
it is optional, but like, do we want to avoid suffering when suffering has a purpose?
Suffering will show up to tell you when you're going off course, right? So it's a wake up call, right? It's like, hey, you're not, this isn't the, you shouldn't be going that way. Didn't you see how bad you feel? Why are you going that way? Go this way. To take a left instead of a right. That's so it's not like enlightenment eradicates suffering once and for all, and that's it. You're just done with it.
Mm.
It's an ongoing thing throughout your life. Like I said, it's just pushing you in one direction versus the other. If you want to, I mean, you can certainly go towards suffering if you want to. I did that for the longest time. I was like, I know this is the way I should go, but I'm not going to go that way. Screw that. I'm going this way.
Mm.
Right. And then all that ever did was lead me to more pain and unhappiness. So suffering is optional because you can choose to move away from it and go the direction that you're supposed to go.
Yeah,
Pain is inevitable because if I break my leg, I'm going to feel the pain. There's no, right? If I get a rotten tooth, if I get sick, those things are going to cause me physical pain that I can't avoid, right?
mm,
That's inevitable. But
yeah,
suffering, I can either choose to move away from it or keep pushing into it, right? And so that's why it's optional.
yeah. And what role does yoga play in that?
Yoga ultimately works in many different ways to try and break you of the illusion of me. That's essentially what it does. It's trying to get rid of, make you realize that there is no such thing as me or I. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So when you spoke about what it meant to be free and happy, what do you think is the purpose of life?
Learning that life is school, whole
Mm,
school, and death is graduation.
mm,
Right? So as long as you're alive, you should still be learning. Mm-hmm. If you're not living. Right? When you're learning new things, you feel like you're alive, right? Like you're doing something. If you're not doing that, then you feel like you've stagnated, right? That's
yeah,
why people, when they get to a certain point in their life and they settle into a routine and a career and a job and they get a family, and then all of a sudden they're like, man, this is boring. I need to do something.
yeah,
Right? That doesn't mean you have to blow up your life either to do something. You know, you can just take up something new. Find a take up painting, learn an instrument. There's always something new you can do. Right. Mhm.
Yeah.
There's never any reason to be bored in this life, that's for sure. Mhm.
So when you spoke about like living in alignment with your soul or learning more from suffering and moving in a direction that leads you to being free and happy, what do you think are like some blockages that humans face when trying to do that?
Their own desires, their own selfishness. Yeah, for sure. I think selfishness is the number one thing that gets in the way, and ignorance. And don't mistake me when I use the word ignorance. I don't mean stupidity. I mean just not knowing, right? Just quite frankly, not understanding. I mean, before yoga for me, or it was actually when I started doing yoga and I started learning all this stuff and things started making a lot more sense. And I was like, man, I feel like somebody just finally handed me the user's manual for being a human, right? Like for the whole 23 years before that, I was just like hitting buttons and pulling levers and being like, I guess that kind of works. And then not really understanding why things were blowing up and smoking. And, it's like, you're like, just fighting with being a human. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, that's why that was happening, because you're not supposed to push that button and then pull that lever. That's not a good combination at all.
Mm.
Right? You understand what I mean?
Yeah. And how do you think people can get out of that ignorance?
Uh, Read, talk with a teacher, force themselves to do new things, especially things that make them a little bit uncomfortable or scared, because that'll force them to question things and look at things more clearly. Yeah, those are all good practices for sure.
Mm. And do you think that fear is necessary or beneficial?
Sure, everything that exists has a purpose. It's just fear is healthy in the sense of, like, go back to our more primitive roots when we were like living in the forest and things. And last time I walked past those bushes and they moved like that, there was a bear in there, right? So this time I'm afraid if I see those bushes moving like that again. That's healthy. That keeps me alive. But when the bear is the person in the cubicle next to you every day, all day, then it becomes a real problem, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Right. Right. Or, and fear can get out of hand too. It can almost like a compulsion, right? So if you kind of think, how does thought work, Pradna, right? When you have an experience through your senses, your brain takes that, and if it's a novel enough experience, like meaning outside the ordinary, then your ego labels that as either pleasurable or painful. And I liked this experience or I didn't like this experience. And then that gets committed to your memory, right? Now, every time you relive that memory in any way, you distort it slightly, right? Science has proven this over and over again. There's abundant data on it, right? Like, so every time you replay your memory, you distort it more and more. If it was pleasurable, you're going to enhance how pleasurable it was and downplay anything that wasn't pleasurable. And if it's painful, you're going to enhance what was painful about it and downplay anything that was pleasurable about it, right? So in an extreme case, if you just keep reliving the same really painful traumatic memory over and over and over again, then that becomes like PTSD, right?
Yeah.
And if you keep chasing the same pleasure over and over and over again, that's addiction, right? So you can take it to those two extremes. But for most normal people, you've got this storehouse of memories that, quite unconscious to you, as you're going throughout your day, you're comparing everything that you're experiencing to all of those other previous experiences and analyzing for them for threats. That's what your brain does. It's there to keep you safe. Fear is there to keep you safe. Right now, if you let that system run your life, then of course you're going to be an anxious, nervous mess, right? Like, it's telling you there's threats everywhere. You have to let your intelligence remain in charge of the brain and the thought process. And that takes practice. training and practice. Think mindfulness, meditation. Time in solitude, time in self-study. That's how you learn to catch yourself when you're getting stuck in those patterns of behavior, and intervene in it. Right? Like the brain is a great servant, but a terrible master. You can't let it be in charge.
That's how our belief systems are formed too.
Yeah, well, beliefs, I think, are incredibly dangerous. They are. Anytime I catch myself saying I believe, I immediately stop now, because it doesn't matter what you believe. It doesn't make it true. You can believe that pink unicorns live in the forest behind your house with all your heart, but that doesn't make it true. I can still believe that if I want to. See, so I'm just deluding myself away from the truth. And the more you get distorted from what's true, the more you're suffering.
So then if you don't have, like, that's interesting. I never thought about it like that. So if you don't have these beliefs, or you're trying not to have these beliefs, then what do you think about like empowering beliefs and, limiting beliefs and it's
Beliefs in general are just a negative, as far as I can see. There's no good that comes from people's beliefs. I want a t-shirt that says, don't believe, no. Like, no, is it true or is it not? And if you can't know whether it's true, then just be like, I don't know. Like, why do you have to know everything? Can't we just be okay with not knowing some things? Like, there's certainly some things that I've come up against that I'm like, that I've reached the limits of my brain's possibility, right? Like, some things are just unknowable, like they're beyond the human potential to understand. And I think that's great. That's what gives the universe mystery still, right?
That's super interesting. So how do you think we can like practice living more in the now and like alleviating our anxiety? I mean, a lot of people also have anxiety of the unknown, right? Like coming from the future,
Oh yeah, the
knowing.
unknown is everybody's biggest fear. I think that's everybody, myself included. That's why we fear death so much, because it's the ultimate question mark. It's the ultimate unknown. Nobody has any idea what happens once you go into that black box, right? Like, it's just, that's what makes it so terrifying. Anything that we can't know or understand tends to scare us. Yeah. You have to, like, well, I mean, you said the answer yourself is just, you have to stay in the now, right? In this moment, am I safe? Yes. Do I have my needs met? Do I have a roof over my head, food to eat, clothes to wear? Most of the time, I think most people can say yes to that. There's certainly plenty of people that cannot answer yes to that in the present. And in that moment, you have to if you are consciousness, and consciousness always has been, it's never been born, it never died. It's as far as this universe goes, it has always existed. So, and you're that ultimately. So really, anything that's happening to you in this body, as unpleasant as it may be in the present moment, we know that everything changes and nothing's going to last forever. So as unpleasant as it may be, you can console yourself in the fact that knowing it's going to go away eventually.
Yeah.
Right. And ultimately, you're not this body, you're not this brain, and you're not these senses. So in the end, none of it's going to matter. I mean, I don't like that saying so much. It is going to matter, because everything that you are and everything that you experience is going to become a part of consciousness in the end. So that's how consciousness evolves and changes, is through all of us and all of our experiences. What you do does matter. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. And do you think that we can create our future?
I think there are certain things that are kind of destined or fated to happen to you in your lifetime. Like, there are going to be these things that you just like you're walking along your path, and then all of a sudden a rock just drops in the middle of your path, and it's like, what are you going to do with that now? There's going to be those things, and I think some of those are predetermined. At least that's what it after 44 years of living, that's what it's my experience feels like. But that, see right there, that could be a belief, right? I don't know that that's true. Right? I'm willing to admit that. But I know that we have free will because consciousness has free will. I think every possibility exists, and then in that present moment, you choose, and that affects what happens after that. So it's kind of like I don't know if you had these, but when I was a kid, there were these books called Choose Your Own Adventure books, and you'd read like the chapter, and at the end of the chapter, it'd be like, if you want to go into the dark cave, turn to chapter 5. If you don't want to go into the dark cave and you want to go into the forest, turn to chapter 3. And like, so then you would read and the way you chose would affect like how you read the story. And that's life in a nutshell. I mean, the choices you make has an effect, right? Yeah. Every choice has an effect. Well, and those effects have to be balanced out with karma. So
what do you think affects these choices though?
Education, tradition, family, society, every TV show you've ever watched, every song you've ever heard, every book you've ever read, all of that is in your memory, and all of that is affecting the way that you're experiencing the present moment. If you're filtering the present moment through your memories, and that's what thought is. I'm taking in the current experience, comparing it to my memories, and trying to predict the future based on my previous experience. So thought is essentially time travel.
And our memories are the ones that form the beliefs that we have, right?
Right. Exactly.
So we're making
it's a problem now. Because you distort those memories every time you replay them. So you're working from a flawed perspective to begin with. If you work from thought, if you work from memory, and if you work from belief. But when you were a kid, right, and you didn't have all these memories yet, you were instead of thinking about the present moment, you were simply perceiving the present moment, which is, what's the difference? You're just using your senses. You're just going, this is what's happening. You're just experiencing it. And then turning it into a memory, right? That's how you built up all those memories to begin with, right? Yeah. So that's why the older we get, the less we perceive and the more we think, unless we do something about it, right? You can go back to perceiving the present moment without the filter of your previous experiences. It's possible.
And we do that by mindfulness and meditation?
That's how I did it. Yeah. I think that's one of the most effective ways to do it. I'm sure I'm not going to say that there are no other ways to do it. But that is the way that I did it. Yes. Okay. Mindfulness is, in the way I think about it, is this space. It's like 2 or 3 seconds of time. The amount of time that it takes you to take a deep breath in and let it out. That's mindfulness. And what I mean by that is, as I'm going through my day, things are happening, right? Things are happening around me. And there's a space between what's happening and then what I do. And that little bit of space, that 3 seconds, allows me to consciously respond to what's happening as it is, rather than reacting from my previous experiences. Memory happens much faster. Reactions are quick, responses are slower. So you've got to move a little bit slower through your day. Like, you cannot be somebody who's perpetually late and racing around and trying to get to your next appointment and be mindful. It's impossible. you have to move slower so that there's that little bit of time. There's like a lag between what's coming in through your senses and then your response to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And what
So it means, if you've got an appointment and it takes you 30 minutes to get there, you need to leave 40 minutes early so that you're not worried about traffic. You're not worried about being late. You're not stressing to get to your appointment. That allows you to be mindful. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's really about time management. Mm-hmm. Cutting out things from your life that suck up time that aren't helping you,
Yeah.
people, activities, phones, social media, right? I mean, they're all good things in moderation, but if it's like anything else, if it gets out of control and it's sucking up too much time, then you need to, have some self-discipline so that you can maintain your mindfulness. Yeah.
Do you look at social media as positive or negative impact?
So, I mean, I'm old enough to remember when Facebook came out, right? And we all got on it, and it was a lot of fun back then. It was way different. It was like you saw everything that everybody posted. It was literally like having your friends in your pocket, and like it was just like a giant group chat all day. That's what it was for like a few years. I think now it does more harm than good. I mean, I really I love that I took so many pictures of my daughter and posted them. So now I get all these memories of her like every day when she was a baby, and I get to go, oh, stuff like there are some things about it that I really like. But I think in general, for most people, it's doing more harm than good. It's not bringing us closer together. It's definitely driving us further. Which is crazy, right? We have more access to each other and more ability to communicate with each other, and we're just using it to fight instead of actually have meaningful dialogue. I think most of the time. Yeah.
Do you think that has to do more with like the inherent use of social media or the way that people use it? Like, does it depends from person to person?
I think it's like any other tool that humans create. Some of us will use it for good and some of us won't. Right?
Yeah.
Just look at nuclear power. It can fuel cleanly or it can destroy an entire city. Right?
Yeah.
Everything we make is like that. That's just human nature, right? I mean, it's not just human nature. That is the dual view of yoga, where like the only reason we can appreciate a beautiful sunrise is because there are disgusting, gross things. You can't appreciate beauty without disgusting. You can't understand that light is light without darkness, right? So you can't understand joy without pain.
Yeah.
Or,
It's like everything
so
is
everything that we create is going to follow that same rule. It's either going to be used for good or bad. And for every Donald Trump, you have a Dalai Lama. It's just the way the world is.
right. And going back to meditation, what are your top tips for meditating? Because a lot of people find it hard to concentrate or focus on their breath.
Thing with the breath is that it's just right there. It's just that it's available, right? It's always happening. So you can always and it's always happening now, right? That's what makes the breath a powerful tool. It's like you always know that that's now, right? If I'm focused on the breath, I'm focused on now. I'm not in the past or the future. But lots of things are happening now. Like one of my favorite meditations to do is just to sit down and close my eyes and listen. All those sounds are happening now too, right? So, and the practice is to notice how your brain is so quick to want to label all the sounds that you hear, like, oh, that's a bird, and there goes a car, and right. But instead of doing that, you try to move away from the thinking brain, which is using the words, right? And one of the tricks that I used that really helped me move away from the thinking brain was be like, just to kind of trick myself a little bit and say, well, maybe the thinking brain is going to go on and still talk, but I'm not going to pay attention to it anymore. I'm going to turn my awareness away from the thinking brain. So maybe it is talking, but I'm not listening anymore, right? It's just like I'm basically putting my hand up to thinking brain's face, and I'm like, go ahead, talk if you want to. I'm just going to listen to these sounds, and rather than label what the sounds are, I place them in space around me, like sonar, right? Like I'm like, that one's close to me, that one's further away, that one's right on top of me, like back into my left, forward into my right. Like, so I'm it's like almost like I'm trying to get a picture of the environment from the sounds I'm hearing rather than looking at the objects with my eyes.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things that you notice when you do that type of meditation is how much space there actually is between the sounds. And it's like that with your eyes too, except we don't do that. We've trained our eyes to focus on the things, and we ignore the space in between the things, right? But actually there's a considerable amount of space in between all of the things. Most things aren't right up against each other, right? And even inside the cells of your own body, from the nucleus to the edge of the cell, it's about if you were like to scale it up, it'd be like you standing in the middle of a baseball field. Huge. It's mostly space. Like you are the nucleus, and the rest of the baseball field is just space. And yet we look so solid, right? Even though everything that we're made up of is mostly space. There's lots of different kinds of meditation practice. I want to be clear about something. A lot of people think that meditation should be this like really transcendent spiritual experience, and there are realms of that, but at least in yoga, meditation is simply inward concentration, right? Like I could the typical Indian example is if I set up a candle and I stare at the candle and I'm not thinking about anything but that candle, and I'm concentrating, right? But the moment I close my eyes and just visualize that candle and nothing else in my mind's eye, now I'm meditating, right? So it's just outward versus inward. Samadhi is the word in yoga that we use for that transcendent state where you seem to merge your individual self back into the whole of consciousness itself, right? And it's really not like it's really just, for me, it feels like I'm letting go of all the more dense layers of myself. Like I turn my body off, I turn my nervous system off, I turn my brain off, and then I can go to the level of ego, intellect, and consciousness, right? Without the distraction of those lower layers of myself. And you've done yoga nidra with me. Certainly you've experienced some of that at this point, yes?
I have, especially the end bit when we go into the meditation and it's like the astral projection.
Yeah, right.
Like my body tingling and like rising above.
Yeah. Techniques like that are very helpful. In the Yoga Sutra, Patanjali says that, samadhi, if you can just do that one thing, that will end the illusion of separateness, of loneliness, of all that, because what you can experience that you're not separate at any point in time. And once you can experience that, then that, of course, that's going to put an end to the delusion that I'm little old me, or woe is me, right? The universe is out to get me. Oh, why I have such bad luck. My relationships never work out. Like, you see all these stories that we tell ourselves that just aren't true. They're just beliefs. And those beliefs lead to suffering. Yeah.
I love that.
You can have positive beliefs, but that doesn't mean that they're helping you. I believe that life will always find a way. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. That's a belief of mine, right? Like, I don't think, like when people talk about climate change and the planet, and I'm like, I'm not concerned for the planet at all. I'm concerned for us. It's going to get to a point where the planet will just uninhabit us and create new life that won't hurt it. Life always finds a way. We should be worried about humanity, right? That's really the big problem with climate change. We need to keep this place hospitable for ourselves. It's the only home we got.
So going back to what you were saying, I wanted to ask you about when you said that positive beliefs don't necessarily benefit us. Like there's this one quote that says that if you believe you're right or you believe you're wrong, I mean, it's by Henry Ford, let me get it right. Um, if you believe you
Whether
can
you
do it,
believe you're right or believe you're wrong, you'll be. Oh, I know exactly what
I know,
quote you're
I got it, I
talking about.
got
I
it.
think
If you believe you can do it or you believe you cannot, you're right.
you're right. Yes, exactly. Either way, you'll be right. Yes, that's it.
So
It's
what do you
true.
think about that?
Because here's the thing, we talked about thought, right? Now, if in the present moment I'm seeing a potential to gain a past pleasure, right, in the future, that what is that? What so right now, I see if I do this, I might be able to repeat this pleasure that I had in the past,
Mm,
in the future, right? That's desire, right? So, right, that action is desire. Now, desire to repeat a pleasure is hope, right?
mm,
Right?
yeah,
Like think of somebody in jail. Someday I'm going to get out of here and I'll be out there.
yeah,
That desire to repeat the pleasure of being out there in the future, that's hope,
yeah,
right? Okay. Now, if I go into this and I'm like, I see this bad memory, this painful, unpleasant memory that I think might happen again in the future. That's still desire, still the same function, except now I have a desire to avoid that past pain. What is that? Fear,
mm,
right?
yeah,
So hope and fear stem from the same root, which is desire,
yeah,
right? So we tend to think of one as good and the other as bad, right? Fear is bad and hope is good. It's they both have a purpose and they're both necessary, but either one can also be detrimental, just like anything else, right? If all I ever hope can be good to move me forward through a difficult situation. But if all I ever do is hope and never act, then is it still a good thing?
mm. But doesn't hope instigate you to act? Like, doesn't it help you act?
Sometimes I think some people just use it as a way of kicking the can and putting off what they know they should do. I'm just gonna hope that things get better in the future instead of leaving this shitty job that I hate. I'm just gonna hope that my marriage gets better in the future, even though I can't stand this person anymore. See what I mean?
Hmm. Okay, so what do you think about manifestation then? Because manifestation is about visualizing the positive, like visualizing what you want from life.
Right. So if consciousness is the creator, sustainer, and destroyer of everything, right? And you are that, then
Yeah.
that means you have the ability to do all those things too. So manifesting is using those powers to create, to bring things into being that don't exist yet.
Yeah, but don't you
The
think,
only thing that limits a human being is what we tell ourselves we're capable of. That's it. And the perfect example is um, the 4 minute mile, right? Up until 1930 or 40, I think it was, somewhere in there. Nobody in human history had ever run a mile in under 4 minutes. So, as far as everybody was concerned, it was impossible for a human being to run a mile in under 4 minutes. It was just not possible. And then somebody did it. And
yeah,
then within that same year, like 3 other people did it because now they knew it was possible. See
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah,
So if you tell yourself you can do it, then you will do it, right? You'll manifest it. You'll put all your
yeah,
powers of consciousness into making that thing happen. So you can visualize it, you can imagine it, you can pour energy into it, right? One of the practices I often do in yoga nidra is a sankalpa. Like what is it that you want to manifest?
mm,
And you say it to yourself like when you're manifesting, you have to say it like it's already exists. You're
yeah,
not wishing for it. You're not praying for it, right? Those are two very different things, right? You're doing it yourself, right? Um, and so if like, say I wanted to be happier, let's just take that. a manifesting isn't, oh, I need to be happier, or I wish I was happier, or please make me happier, right? See how, right? No, a manifestation is, I am happy,
Yeah.
right? It's like faking it till you make it, right? Like you just have to own it, right? Like this is, no, I am going to start this business. And you can think whatever you want, but I am going to do that,
Yeah.
right? You see how it's much different? It just hasn't happened yet. It is going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? Everything that I'm doing is working towards pulling that thing into being, right?
Yeah. But don't you think those are positive beliefs, like that manifestation or these affirmations are positive beliefs, right?
Yeah. I mean, you could argue that for sure. That's not an unvalid point. At the It only hasn't happened yet at the human level, because we experience time, right? But at universal consciousness level, there is no time. There's just one giant now, right? And the way that you get there is because in order for you to experience time, there has to be two things, right? Like right now, there's a distance between me and you. And if I wanted to get to you, it would require time to cover that distance. But at the level of the whole universe, there's no two, there's just one. So there's no distance. So there's no time. It's just one giant ongoing explosion, right? From the Big Bang to the end of it.
Yeah.
Right? So at that level, if you're manifesting from the level of consciousness, then you can say with some sincerity that it is going to happen, or I'm going to die trying, right? Like, I think my favorite quote about that was when somebody asked Thomas Edison how it felt to fail so many times when making the light bulb. And he said, I didn't fail. The light bulb was an invention that had 1,000 steps. And what he's kind of implying with that is I was going to keep trying until I found something that worked. Or I died. Right? That was the only thing that was going to get in the way, is something stopping me from being physically able to keep trying. Right. Yeah. And that's in truth, that's really the only separation between success and failure, is how long are you willing to keep trying before you stop trying? Right? If you keep trying and trying and trying, eventually you're going to succeed, or you're going to run out of time. And that might stop you from succeeding. So death and when you decide to stop trying are the only things that can really stop you from succeeding at whatever you want to do.
I understand.
Right.
That's all the questions I have for you today. But thank you so much for your time. This was such an interesting conversation, but it was also pretty heavy. Like, I feel like I have to digest all this information, but I learned much.
I'm sorry. I hope I didn't talk too much. I hope it is digestible.
No, of course not. I feel like I learned so much. Like, I love everything that you said. Like, it changed my perspective a bit on a lot of things. So I really liked that.
Good.
It was a different way of looking at things that I've always looked at in one way. So,
well, that's how we get stuck and not wind up with blind spots and things that we're not seeing clearly, because we just make assumptions that is right. And then we're like, because we never actually took the time to question it, like, is that how that is? Well, now that I look at it that way, I'm starting to wonder, right? So that's why talking to each other is so important.
Yeah, questioning is my favorite thing ever. Questioning is my favorite thing ever.
Yes. Question everything, always. That's the only way to get to the truth.
I love that.
All right.
Thank you so much for your time.
All right. Okay. Good night.
Have a great day, Jordan. Bye.
Bye.